Hey everybody, it's Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. This is the Power at Work blog. Welcome back. Glad to have you here. In just a few minutes, you're going to get to hear my conversation with Tony Clark, who's the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. The MLBPA produced what I think is one of the biggest and most important union organizing and collective bargaining successes of 2022-23. You'll hear Tony and I talk about it in a lot of detail. Tony was a player before he became a union leader. He's the first player, actually, to ever lead the MLBPA. It's actually pretty rare in professional sports. I remember Gene Upshaw, who you'll hear me mention in the interview, who led the National Football League Players Association, was another exception to the case, but not many others. Tony started as a minor leaguer in Western New York, near Niagara Falls, but he was a power-hitting, switch-hitting first baseman for 15 seasons and more than 1,500 games in the majors. He batted .262 with 251 home runs and 824 RBIs during his career. He was really good. He appeared on a Hall of Fame ballot. And Tony retired from the Arizona Diamondbacks after the 2009 season. But I think some of his best work has happened off the field in his leadership of the Major League Baseball Players Association. You know, we don't think a lot about baseball players or basketball players or football players as workers. And that's what today's rant is going to be about a little bit, because I was kind of disappointed that there was not a broader and more enthusiastic embrace of the amazing success that the Baseball Players Association had in 2022-23 organizing minor league players. It got some attention in the sports press, and you see articles maybe in ESPN.com or The Athletic and a few other places, but we didn't make a big deal about it because I think there's an unfortunate tendency to underplay or isolate athletes and maybe performing artists too when we talk about unions and worker power. And maybe that's understandable. Their work lives are, very different from our work lives, from the work lives of a typical union member in the United States. Their careers are a lot shorter. The average baseball player's career is only about 5.5 years long. Some of them earn immense amounts of money, generational wealth amounts of money. In fact, I had never heard the term generational wealth until I heard about what some athletes earn in their careers. And, they play a game for a living to entertain us. And so it's kind of hard to think of them as sort of rank and file workers, but they are workers. There are workers. And you're going to hear Tony talk a little bit about what life was like for minor league baseball players before they had a union. And, it's a story that workers all across the country can identify with. They were grossly underpaid because that was a way for their owners to squeeze out an extra dollar, an extra dime of profit. Their living and working conditions often were just terrible. They were working second and third jobs in order to survive. They weren't treated professionally, and Lord knows they did not have voice in the workplace. They did not have somebody to represent them in the workplace. Now that is a story. That is a story that workers of all kinds, all across the country, can identify with. And let me just say, in the next few days, I expect writers in the television and movie industry in Hollywood may launch, I hope they don't have to, but they may launch a strike. And again, the work that television writers do doesn't look like the work of most working people in the United States. They're not working with stars. They're not writing jokes. They're not writing drama scenes. But they're in the same fight that all workers really are in. the big issue that the writers face, and also that the minor league baseball players face, was, are they going to get a fair share of the value that their writing or playing produces? Because the owners are making a lot of money off of these workers, a lot of money. And, you know, I don't know what a baseball game without any players looks like, but it's not going to make any money. A television show without any writers, it's not going to make any money. Unless it's maybe 100% improv, but even those shows have writers. So it's the same issue that a carpenter or an auto worker or a service worker encounters. It's the same issue that fast food workers and warehouse workers or graduate student workers on a college campus encounter. Right? Are they going to be treated with respect? Are they going to be paid a fair share of what they produce? Right? In some cases, there are other issues, like in the case of the minor league baseball players, are they going to have safe and healthy places to live? Right? Are they going to be able to support their families? Some workplaces have safety and health issues. Some workplaces have discrimination issues. But let me just say, there is one important difference between some of the sports unions and the performing arts unions that and other working people, and that is, we all know them, right? Most people in America know a union member, in part because they're a fan of a professional sport, or they go to the movies, or they watch television. And the people you're seeing there are union members. And that really, really matters, because they can demonstrate the value of having a union. That's actually one of the most important pieces of this minor leaguer story, is the place where these players started, the terrible conditions that they were in, and what this collective bargaining agreement that the Major League Baseball players negotiated for them delivered for them. Man, that is a change millions of workers, tens of millions of workers in America would love to have. And so these baseball players can be models. The writers who are looking to strike out in Hollywood can be models, showing that, yes, if you look to the people on either side of you, your coworkers, to build the power that you need in order to demand your fair share and to demand to have a voice in the decisions in your workplace, that you can win and you can get the things that you need from your employer. And let me just say, I think Tony does a much better job than I just did of explaining that importance, the importance of having a voice, having what he described as a seat at the table. And let me also say, I think these baseball players and writers and actors and basketball players, I'm a big basketball fan, let's go Knicks. Another thing that they can do is they can help to educate. All right, a lot of these minor leaguers are playing in right-to-work states, in smaller cities. Their fans are from smaller communities, maybe don't have a lot of unions around, a lot of union members around. Maybe there's a building trades council nearby. Maybe some of the public employees are organized. Maybe a lot of those states don't have public employee collective bargaining. But when they go to that ballpark and they see a union member, maybe it gets them thinking, I could have this too. I can improve the quality of my life. So I think the story is a powerful one. That's why I wanted to talk to Tony. I wanted you to meet Tony. He doesn't get a lot of press. He's kind of a behind-the-scenes guy, which is different for that union. That union had a lot of really high-profile leaders over time. But he's quietly immensely effective. And I went through some of the statistics as I introduced him on the interview, the conversation that you're about to see, about what he's been able to accomplish. This union is on an epic winning streak. They are on an epic winning streak, and it's the kind of thing we should not dismiss, but that we should ask ourselves, how do we replicate this in industry after industry, with union after union, with worker after worker, showing them that organizing a union can really make a difference. So there's my rant. It's my pleasure to turn you over to my conversation with Tony Clark, and I'll see you for a few minutes right after. Thanks.
So, Tony, where are you in the world right now? Geographically, where are you in the world?
I was in Mexico City yesterday, landed last night in Arizona. We'll be in Arizona for a few days before hitting the road again.
And are you doing member meetings, or are you just catching some games, or what are you doing?
No, the Mexico City trip were the two games, San Francisco and San Diego. Right before that, had a speaking engagement. We'll have another speaking engagement next week, and then heading back to New York, where I'm hoping to see some players once I get back to the main office there in New York before hitting the road again for a couple of things internationally. So players during the season, we try to give them a little bit of a breather. At least I do. We've got a number of staff that travel around to see them themselves. Something pops up, then I'll jump in and get more involved. We've got staff that have more regular touch points physically in the ballparks than I do.
Yeah. So I think the reason that you're getting so many speaking invitations right now is the reason I wanted to have you on the blogcast. And it's because my view, this is just my view, but I think you share this view, is that the Major League Baseball Players Association was the author of one of the biggest worker organizing and collective bargaining successes of 2022, 2023. I mean, it's a remarkable success, and for the people out there who don't know what it is that you accomplished, you organized 5,000 minor leaguers. You persuaded the owners to voluntarily recognize the owners in the league to voluntarily recognize the union's representation of the minor leaguers. By doing that, you increased the size of the union by, I think, 400% or more than 400%, right? Yeah, I think you had 1,200 major leaguers. Now you have more than 6,000 total members. I mean, there's no union anywhere that wouldn't kill to have that kind of growth. And then you successfully negotiated a contract for the minor leaguers, and you negotiated the contract in 4 months. 4 months. So to me, that's a gigantic success. So I really want to take you through that. First of all, I want you to get the immense credit that you're due for this amazing success, but I also want you to help us understand how you did it, because, like I said, this is a model, hopefully, for others. So let me start with your new members, the minor leaguers. You started your career as a minor leaguer. Tell us a little bit about what life was like for minor leaguers before the union came in. What were their working conditions? What were their living conditions? Because I think people think baseball players are baseball players. That's not really true. Tell us a little bit about them.
Well, I appreciate the lead up and the build up and the support, Seth. There are a lot of people that were involved in the process, and we'll talk more about that. But in regards to the minor leagues itself, unfortunately, a lot of what today's minor league players experience were the same things that I experienced 20 plus years ago, where very rarely do you have a car that you can drive to and from the ballpark. The food at the ballpark is not conducive of what you would feed a professional athlete, a finely tuned professional athlete. Living conditions were often multiple players in 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And when I say multiple, akin to when I was in rookie ball in Bristol, Virginia, where we had 6 players in a 2 bedroom apartment, 1 bath. Routinely hearing stories about that many guys in that type of setting, or even multiple families of players in that setting, or even upwards of a dozen players living in a basement, getting to and from a ballpark in whatever fashion that they could, more often than not walking miles before they got to the ballpark to play that night's game. Was still the norm. Over the course of the last couple of years, the league had done some things to improve some of those dynamics, but as was a telltale in how quickly the guys organized and wanted a formal seat at the table, it wasn't near enough. And so, again, over the course of the last 20, 25 years, things hadn't changed much. And the players really started to find their voice once the season got shut down in 2020. So can fill in some of the gaps in between and kind of what happened from there. But a day in the life of a minor leaguer, particularly on the lower levels, complex leagues, short season A ball, short season A ball got removed, which is another conversation. But A ball, AA, and AAA are all a little bit different, but all in a lot of ways much the same.
Yeah, and I was hearing stories from some of your folks about, yeah, players living in their cars, players working 2 and 3 jobs. They're being paid, some of them between $5,000 and $14,000 to play ball. And the big change came, I think, and tell me if I've got this right. The big change came when Major League Baseball sort of took over the minor leagues. The minor leagues had been independent, semi-independent. You had the farm system, but then Major League Baseball, or the owners of Major League Baseball, sort of came in and took over. So how did that affect your decision to organize? And also there was a very important court case involved, and then, in not a good way, Congress intervened and in any, if it's possible, made it even worse. So tell me a little bit about the conditions that led you to make the decision to organize these workers.
Well, Seth, you highlighted a couple of them there, and you mentioned the league taking over the minor leagues. When they reduced the minor leagues from 162 minor league teams to 120, that was an eye opener for a lot of folks. Not only did you eliminate 20 teams, you eliminated a lot of jobs. 42 teams, sorry, 42 teams, and you eliminated a lot of jobs. And not having a formal seat at the table and recognizing that the league could do it whenever they wanted to do it was a big issue, particularly coming out of a 2020 season where no minor league games were played. You also mentioned $14,000 to $15,000. Look, we had a number of players on the minor league side that were making anywhere between $6,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year. So the multiple jobs was what often happened during the off season while the club was asking guys to train and come into spring training in peak condition. Guys were having to work multiple jobs and or ask for money and support from their families and or take out loans to go in debt just to continue to pursue their dream of being a major league ball player. And so that has been the case and continued to be the case over the course of these last couple of years when things really started to move. And the lawsuit that you mentioned was the Sene lawsuit. That lawsuit went back to, I believe, 2014 or so. That, along with what you represented in regards to the Save America's Pastime Act, which was hidden in the March 2018 omnibus bill. Those were the catalysts for a lot of the internal discussion at the PA leading up to and into 2020. And as I mentioned, when 2020 hit and the major league season was shortened and the minor league players didn't play, and we were looking for an opportunity to provide support to the minor league players. And when I say we, I mean the major league players were looking to provide support to the minor league players. There were two entities that were out there that were providing that support. One was Advocates for Minor Leaguers, and the other was More Than Baseball. They both did two different things, but the major league players committed money to provide support to these guys during a year where they weren't being played, where games weren't being played. So on the heels of the Sene lawsuit and the conversation that struck and the concerns that were being addressed as a part of that lawsuit, as well as the Save America's Pastime Act from 2018, along with the removal of 42 teams and a significant amount of minor league jobs, and then having the 2020 season shut down. All of those things led to conversations about a formal seat at the table. And so over the course of that 2020 year, when we were looking to provide support, engaged the two entities that I talked to or that I mentioned, and started an ongoing dialogue. And both groups did a tremendous job. Advocates really helped a lot of the minor league players find their voice and oriented those voices publicly to where a lot more of those stories were made public. We engaged routinely, and when I say routinely, weekly, bi-weekly, advocates for minor leaguers as their conversations and engagements happened. And all of that, as you felt the momentum build, led to August of last year. Again, big gap, can fill in more of those, but there was a lot of work being done prior to 2020. The blueprint for organizing, Ian Penny, who was our general counsel at the time, is my senior advisor now, put together a power deck as to how we were going to try and do this, a bit of a shock and awe campaign, if you will.
Take us through the details. That's I think what people are most interested in is take us inside you laid out the conditions that led you to organize, but how did you do it? What was the process you went through? So the two advocacy organizations you were talking about were in contact with a bunch of minor league players, and you were working through those, not working through those, you were working with those advocates. Tell us a little bit about the organizing process, because these are players who are spread all across the country. Many of them coming from the Dominican Republic and other countries in order to play in the United States. Tell us what you did. How did you do it? How did the union do it?
Advocates did a very good job of finding player leadership and tangible touch points in each of the minor league clubhouses at each of the levels. And so as we continued to have conversations with advocates, and as they continued to engage the players, you could see a bit of an infrastructure starting to be put in place where as much as we were having weekly and biweekly conversations with them, we at the same time wanted to try and make sure there were 6 degrees of separation, such that information didn't find its way out publicly, that we continued to maintain some level of integrity and control to the dialogue as the drumbeat continued. And obviously in our game, that's not very easy to do, but we were able to do it over the course of those couple of years, and from time to time, when necessary, I would engage through advocates the players directly. Sometimes the minor league players, that is. Sometimes they were in person. Sometimes they were via Zoom. So as advocates continued to engage the guys, there were times when perhaps things weren't moving fast enough, or there were questions about whether or not the PA was truly in the background, because a lot of the sentiment we were receiving was that if the major league players weren't in support of the guys, that this wasn't going to work, and being a part of the MLBPA was the best way, if not the only way, to make this work. And I say that to also say that there were a number of organizations over the years that came by our offices looking to organize the minor leaguers, and we provided some expertise and support to the extent that we could at those times, and it never got off the ground. And so in acknowledging what had been done or tried before, with the idea that these minor league players, and recognizing the support that they were already receiving from the major league guys, and that being a part of the MLBPA was the ultimate landing ground. From time to time, I would physically engage, so the players heard from me about the interest that we had in supporting their efforts, and the engagement, and financial and otherwise, that we were willing to provide as they continued to build this momentum. Again, all leading to our engaging formally our major league players, wanting to make sure that they had to give us the okay to launch this campaign, if you will. So a lot of the work done in the background, so that when we did engage the major league guys, we could tell them exactly what it was going to look like, when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, the costs associated with it, and the reasons why. And the players, unsurprisingly, unanimously voted to do it. And so in a very short period of time thereafter, those major league players were unanimous in their support. We pulled the trigger.
Yeah. So my recollection is, and one of the reasons that you were engaged in what I would call sort of a little bit of constructive ambiguity about the role of the PA in the organizing, you had to negotiate a contract for the major leaguers. A lot of this was happening at around the time the collective bargaining agreement was coming up for negotiation in the major leagues. And my recollection is that there was a need for caution about looking like you weren't getting distracted from what was happening in the major leagues by what was happening in the minor leagues. So you were doing two things, one publicly, another thing not as publicly at the same time. And it's exciting to hear about the sort of grassroots leadership that you and advocates put together, that was the main driving force behind the organizing. But I wanted to ask you, did the major leaguers play any role in the organizing? Did you have players and your player leadership playing a role in the organizing?
We had a handful of player leadership on the major league side that was really stemming from 2020, engaged throughout the process. And yes, those major league players that were involved were focused in on the organizing effort, or the idea that the organizing effort would be the final landing spot. But again, there was a lot of work being done, and you mentioned two things going on at once. To be clear, a lot of the heavy lifting and communicating was being done by advocates. Our focus was on the major league bargaining,
right.
and we have a number of staff led by our deputy executive director, and Bruce Meyer, that was leading our internal group in those negotiations. And so if there was any downtime, or if there was a half hour here or a half hour there, where a conversation could be had and a call scheduled, then it happened in an effort to again keep things moving in the background. But I mentioned earlier the blueprint and the shock and awe dynamic of this thing, because we had so many players, and because they were so spread out. Because they were in the middle of a season, because it was physically impossible to get in front of these guys, because there was so much work being done while trying to maintain the integrity of that work, there was a realization that the window of time that we actually had to try and go from 0 to 100 was small. Again, these guys had day jobs, and so a good portion of the day we weren't going to have them. And obviously, once you publicly acknowledge that there's a campaign to organize, it provides any number of individuals and or groups an opportunity to try and create havoc amid that campaign. So trying to do so in a small window, trying to do so when you physically weren't in front of these players, and trying to do so in a way electronically that, to our knowledge, hadn't been done before. All of those things had to happen, and we had to be in a position that when we did launch, worked as efficiently and as effectively as possible, so that not only did we comply with the labor laws, such that the card signing, it being done electronically, could all be verified, but doing so in a climate where 72 hours, maybe a little bit longer, you could collect the requisite number of cards and then look to engage the employer and or the NLRB. So it was a relatively short period of time.
Wait. Are you saying you collected cards from a majority of the players in 72 hours electronically? Is that how it worked, really?
In 72 hours, we had enough cards signed to approach the NLRB. By the end of that week, we were well past the 50% mark. And so, when I say it happened very quickly, again, which is a testament to because a number of the advocates folks then came on staff at the point in time that we launched. The engagements of the players and the work and communications that were done with the advocate staff and our existing staff over that period of time were nothing short of amazing.
What week was that? When did that? So basically a week of collecting cards. What week was that?
We launched late at night on August 29th, if I'm recalling correctly. So it was that next week where we secured the requisite numbers. The following week, where we continued to add, and then approach the league.
Yeah, appropriate that I believe was Labor Day week. I mean, it's almost a little bit too symbolic. So let's talk about the league and your friend Rob Manfred. How did you persuade the commissioner and the owners to voluntarily recognize the union? Was it just that stock and all worked and you had so much support that it just made no sense for them to fight over it? Or was it, did you make a compelling case, or did they, why did they do it? Because that's, I mean, something because you watch this stuff fairly closely. That's not what employers in America are doing right now. It's the exceptional case that an employer sees that their employees want a union and they say, okay, with me, let's do it, and we'll negotiate a contract in 4 months. Most employers, the Amazons, the Starbucks, and others are just fighting tooth and nail to stop their employees who want a union from getting a union. And the history of the relationship with the league is not necessarily one of hugs and kisses. Why did they do it? How did you persuade them to do it?
Well, I don't know that we persuaded them to do it. You'd have to ask them in whether or not the commentary, the arguments were persuasive. But as I've often said, we had the right group of players at the right time, and a bit of a perfect storm of circumstances. Political climate being pro-labor, NLRB, Sene lawsuit, as we mentioned, SAPA, which we talked about a little bit, public sentiment and the work that had been done from 2020 really moving forward. All of that led to MLB recognizing the organizing efforts. And so, as I mentioned, we had a 72-hour, a week, 2-week, 14-day to 17-day kind of organizing drive, where once the numbers leveled off, approached the league. But there was conversation shortly thereafter, and against the backdrop of having the requisite numbers, the question really became whether or not we were going to need to go through the NLRB, or whether or not there was going to be voluntary recognition. But we had the numbers and the cards. It was just a matter of how we wanted to do it. And so in that climate, and against the backdrop of those moving pieces, there was an opportunity for the league to address a lot of the things that they were having to deal with themselves in regards to the minor leaguers, but do so with an entity that they knew, which was the Major League Baseball Players Association. So I think there was a lot of moving pieces all coming together at the same time, along with the right group of players at the right time, with the right leadership in support of them, and in this instance, the right leadership and the right fraternity in support of them, being the Major League players and the MLBPA, that it all fell in places as quickly as it did.
Yeah, and what I'm just curious, you referenced it. What percentage of the players did you get to sign cards eventually? What number did you eventually get to that was part of this shock and awe campaign?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you the exact numbers. Won't give you the exact numbers.
I'm trying to make news here.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But I'll share this, and you're aware. Obviously, there's a percentage that you can approach the NLRB with. There's a percentage that you have to have in order to approach the league, and it didn't take us long, as I mentioned, the first 72 hours to get the requisite percentage for the NLRB, and then it really was over that next week where we had the requisite numbers for approaching the league. So it was just a matter of time. But again, I can't emphasize enough, at that time of year, with what our players had going on as part of their day-to-day, doing so electronically in a way that hadn't been done before, short period of time, doing so electronically, is truly what I think gave us an opportunity to get it across the finish line. I don't think in any other circumstance, knowing that there were other circumstances where other groups tried to do so, that electronic communication that had MLBPA as the headline was I think a game changer when the dust settled.
Yeah. So let me close out this part of the conversation by referencing back that you started your career as a minor leaguer. Was this a little bit personal for you? Was this a little bit of, seeing yourself in those guys who are playing single A, double A ball, most of whom are never going to become Tony Clark in the major leagues, have a long, very successful major league career. They're playing for the love of the game. They're playing to feed their families. Was this a personal thing in part for you? Obviously, as the leader of a union, you wanted the union to be successful, but you lived this experience. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, ironic enough, one of the first things I asked Michael Weiner, my predecessor, God rest his soul, when I came on board after I was done playing in 2009, I asked him about this specifically. Is there any way to unionize the minor league players? And he suggested that I talk to a few people and get some input, and I did that. And each of the people that I talked to laid out all the reasons why it would never work. And some of those folks, even when we started the campaign formally, publicly, same folks suggested it wasn't going to work. So it was personal. Our player fraternity is personal to me. It's truly the only reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. Both our inactive players, our active players, obviously, which are our responsibility, and the next generation of ball player. And so asking that question initially, gosh, in 2010, and then seeing all of the things that manifested themselves from there to get to this point, was a culmination of, a personal concern for the well-being and just fundamental fairness to all those that have aspirations of playing Major League Baseball, who start out as kids. And if you're fortunate enough to play in high school, that's great. And if you have an opportunity to play in college, even better. But playing professionally, going through the minor leagues and all the challenges that are associated with it to become a Major League ball player, anything that we can do to give the guys the best opportunity to realize their goals and dreams, and when it's all said and done, feel as they're a part of a fraternity that protects their interests and advances those. That's personal.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about how the collective bargaining agreement came out and what improvements those minor leaguers got out of joining a union.
Well, I mentioned earlier this idea of a formal seat at the table. When you're not unionized and you don't have a formal seat at the table, you're at the whim of your employer. To the extent that they have a handshake agreement on any one particular issue, tomorrow they can take that agreement right back from you. It's not until you have a collective bargaining agreement in place that governs and dictates the terms and conditions by which you work, that is binding, that they have to abide by it. That is a contract that's going to exist in over some period of time before you have to sit down and negotiate again. In talking with the minor league players, with the hope of trying to find common ground on a CBA before opening day of this year, the realization was we had 60 plus years of experience on the major league side in negotiating a collective bargaining agreement, almost 60 years of collective bargaining. And so while it's not always apples to apples, there are a number of things that are in the major league CBA that we could largely cut and paste and or edit and adapt in a period of time that would be much shorter than if we were starting from scratch. And as I shared with the minor league players, our major league CBA, all of the provisions that are in there, all of the protections that are in there, or the due process that's in there, has all been fought for over the period of time I mentioned since the first CBA in '68. That means, in all the challenges that we've had historically, players lost money, players' careers ended, all with an eye on leaving the game better for the next group of players. And so the minor league players weren't starting from scratch. We weren't trying to reinvent the wheel in a lot of ways. We were trying to take what had been established as best practices that protected the interests of our members and advanced the interests over the course of the years that I mentioned, take that and use that as any number of starting points for the conversation with the league about the minor league players. So although there are some things that are different, although there are instances where, again, it's not apples to apples, taking almost 60 years of experience, building that into a very first CBA is not something that normally happens. And so, yes, we were fortunate over the course of 4 months to find common ground on a CBA that was in place for this year. But I think, as you probably know as well as anyone, just because you organize doesn't mean you're going to have the first CBA. A lot of times you never get there. And more often than not, when you do have a first CBA, it takes a year plus on average in order to get there. So doing it in 4 months and being able to take the experience that we've had and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into our existing major league CBA and being able to navigate that and maneuver that into a first CBA on the, as much as possible anyway, on the minor league side is a tangible benefit and one that the minor league guys truly appreciated.
Right, and one of the products or several of the products of that agreement is wages went way up. There are fixed training periods now. You were talking about how these guys were sent home and expected to come back in peak athletic form. Now there are fixed training periods. Some of the other issues you mentioned, nutrition is addressed in the contract. There's a joint competition committee. There's living arrangements are now fixed in the contract, so players are going to be able to live reasonable existences while they're playing. I don't think anybody's going to get immensely rich off of that contract, but they're going to be able to support themselves and their family. And very, very different both from when you were a minor leaguer and also the way minor leaguers had to live just a year ago coming out of the pandemic. So a major accomplishment. Let's turn to the major leagues. You wrapped up a new collective bargaining agreement in March of last year, but it happened in the context of a lockout. And I remember when we met back the last time we were together, and we talked about the negotiations, it was not entirely clear, at least to me, that the lockout was going to end before opening day. It was possible that opening day was going to have to get pushed back. So, how are you and your members now feeling about the lockout and the deal that followed it? And are there still some hard feelings, or is everyone past it? And is it my imagination, or is the Major League Baseball Players Association on a sort of epic winning streak right now? I mean, I think that the major league contract, the minor league contract, the minor league organizing, surviving a lockout. Is there something that I'm missing, or is this are you guys batting 1,000 in the last couple of years?
Well, I appreciate that, but let me start first by recognizing our tremendous staff. We wouldn't be able to accomplish half the things that we were able to do so on behalf of our members without a very experienced and very talented staff, which I lean on greatly in order to provide this set support. So let me start first by suggesting that. As far as this last round of bargaining on the major league side was concerned, we had challenges. I acknowledge that we had challenges coming out of 2016 and the experiences on the heels of how the world shifted shortly thereafter, meaning thereafter that CBA in 2016-17 fell into place. And as a result of how the climate shifted and the game shifted, recognize that there were some things in order to move our game forward and support our players that we wanted to have a conversation about into that 2021 negotiation. And so a lot of work was done over the course of the years leading up to when we formally started that negotiation that truly laid out for the players what the moving pieces were, why the certain pieces were pieces we should pay attention to, how they were going to affect players both now and moving forward. And we offered
put a finer, if you would, Tony, put a finer point on that. What were some of the big issues coming out of the 2016 collective bargaining agreement that you and the players really felt like needed to be addressed? For example, the arbitration system, as I understand it, was one of the big issues.
It was. Salary arbitration has always been one of the issues, and it's been a work stoppage issue historically. Free agency has always been an issue, and it's been a work stoppage issue historically. Increasing the amount of pay for players earlier in their career has been a work stoppage issue historically. And so any number of things that we wanted to address, revenue sharing, the competitive balance tax, were all work stoppage issues historically. And so players knew that these were difficult issues. These were challenging issues that we were going to talk about and need to work through. But in an effort to move the game forward and position players in the game in the best possible light, we were going to have to address them. And there were going to be some challenges along the way. But one of the things that I often share with the players, and you may have heard me say in the past, is that educated players make educated decisions. It's not about being in a room and offering a bargaining room and offering these tremendous arguments about why the other side should appreciate the position and or the particular specific issue that you're trying to address and make improvements on. It's about the other side knowing that you believe this is the most important piece or one of the most important pieces, and you're willing to push and scratch and claw in order to make improvements in those areas. You never want to start a negotiation with the hope of it shutting down the industry, but you do realize there are some tough conversations that need to happen along the way, and it's a possibility depending on the complexities around those particular issues. And so the players knew that, but they embraced those moving pieces, improving the pay early on in a player's career, doing what we could to try to address and improve salary arbitration, have conversations about how to improve and excite teams in free agency, how best to excite and encourage, which is kind of crazy to actually say out loud, teams to be competitive. In an atmosphere where you didn't necessarily have to be in order to make money as an organization. And so with the shift, as I mentioned, and with the considerations that we wanted to address moving forward, such that teams were excited about putting the best team on the field that they possibly could, and what that meant throughout the course of their decision making in any one particular year, and how players were positioned as a part of that decision making in any one particular year. We had to address all of those things, we believe, to move the game forward. Starting the year where you had upwards of a third of the league not interested in competing is not a good place for the league to be. And so we worked and we pushed and we worked and we pushed, and it became unfortunately clear that the interest that we had in engaging on some of these issues wasn't the same or reflected on the other side, and even lending itself to the last 72 hours before the expiration of that CBA. There were no, we made proposals, but there were no proposals passed from the other side. And so the work stoppage seemed like an eventuality, and one that had been planned for some time. Even coming out of the other side of the work stoppage starting, still took 6 weeks or so before there was subsequent engagement. Players were prepared for that. We as an organization on their behalf prepared them for that. And so none of it was really a surprise, unfortunate, but not a surprise. But put our guys in the best position possible to continue to have the conversation about the things that were important to them. And then when the league was interested in getting in the same room and truly drilling down, sun up to sundown, some long days, we were able to work through it. And again, not without its challenges, but we were able to find common ground in a way that even after the regular season was threatened on more than one occasion, players held true to the concerns and issues that they wanted to address. We were still, over some constructive and creative scheduling, still able to get 162 games played.
Yeah, it was a remarkable, excuse me, accomplishment, and a sign of the union being not only smart and strategic about how to move forward, but the players maintaining solidarity throughout. I mean, there was you didn't hear press stories about people griping about your leadership or people griping even about the league. I mean, as a general matter, folks were staying on not just on script, but staying together and communicating a common message about how to move forward. And that must have sent a meaningful message to the league and to the leadership of the league. And I want to get to another point about solidarity, because let me just say, my friend Liz Schuler will get very mad at me if I don't raise this with you. You and the players made a decision I think for the first time in the history of the union, to affiliate with the AFL-CIO. And for many, many years, the only sports players union that was affiliated with the AFL was the football players. I remember Gene Upshaw being at executive council meetings with Gene Upshaw back during the day. By the way, I think he's the only other player to have led a union in the way that you are leading your former union. What made you decide to affiliate with the AFL? And tell us a little bit about how the Federation Sports Council works. Like, is it a very competitive group of folks trying to figure out who's in charge, or how do you and are there common issues? Tell us a little bit about that. But I most want to know, how did you make the decision? What made you decide to make the decision? You and I have talked about in the past, but I'd love for you to share some insight into it.
Well, the first thing I want to note is what you highlighted in regards to solidarity. There's a quote that's in each of our offices in New York, Arizona, and the Dominican Republic that's Marvin Miller's kind of foundation piece, which is the secret of the success of the Major League Baseball Players Association is not a secret. It's in the solidarity of its members. It's a quote that rings true throughout our hallowed halls. Our player leadership on the major league side during the course of bargaining was unbelievable, truly, in their engagement, their involvement. This last round of bargaining was the first time in our organization's history, and I guess this is one positive with Zoom, that we had players either physically in the room or on Zoom in every bargaining session that we had.
This is the first time that players have been directly engaged in the negotiations.
No, in every session.
In every session.
Yeah, we've always had players involved.
I got you.
We always historically had taken those bargaining sessions to where the players were during the season. But very rarely did you have all 30 teams represented at every session. And that's what we this last go around. And so it's a hat tip to the player leadership and an acknowledgement of how important and how fundamental Marvin's comment statement was, foundationally was. In 2020, during the course of the challenges we all had personally and professionally with COVID, but in particular, our major league season only playing 60 games. One of the things that happened as I engaged a number of folks in and around our game, including the AFL-CIO, was that there were a lot of people that were affected, not just because of COVID, but because our industry wasn't playing. And so I got a little bit of feel for who all those unions were that make our game great. You don't see them very often. You don't necessarily cross paths with them very often. But we were building relationships during that challenging time, publicly and privately. And those unions were a part of the AFL-CIO. And so I started to truly appreciate what all was involved in making our industry spin. And as a result of the support that we were receiving from all of those entities, and as time moved forward, support that we were able to provide back publicly and otherwise to those same entities, a conversation about the AFL-CIO became far more tangible, a connecting point, if you will, a broader fraternity beyond the player fraternity, where brothers and sisters that were part of unions that were supporting each other already was something that our players were interested in being a part of. Admittedly, Seth, and I've shared this with President Schuler, the politics are the politics. That's not really why we were interested in engaging the AFL-CIO, recognizing what the AFL-CIO does in all the areas that it doesn't. That was one area where players weren't as concerned, were though focused in on supporting brother and sister unions, if for no other reason than we all learned how much we were supporting each other, whether we realized it or not. The Sports Council itself was something that was put together, which was specific to the sports. And so having a council that over the course of the last year or so has added more and more of the North American sports unions is truly a hub of information, best practices, and engagement and support, where what's the phrase said? There's strength in numbers.
Yes, absolutely.
More of us that we found ourselves in the same room, the more of us that found ourselves in the same room, the more we understood and appreciated the concerns and issues across unions. Not to mention that a lot of those issues were the same. And so we engaged this council, or we engaged this particular organization, or here's what we've done in the past. You start sharing your experiences and best practices, and you provide an opportunity and a forum by which to raise all ships. And the stronger we are collective, the stronger we are individually, and we are collective, the greater the likelihood we can improve the workplace dynamics and otherwise for those that we represent. And so it was an interesting pathway to get there. A lot of it was an education on my end and sharing that information with players. And then the Sports Council, a vision piece for President Schuler. And yeah, you get us all in the same room. We all have thoughts and we all have concerns, but President Schuler does a fantastic job in orienting those thoughts, leading those thoughts, and helping to guide and direct and gather the information necessary to, again, breathe into each of us in the fashion that we need to.
I agree with you completely. I'm a big fan of hers, and I was a big fan of this decision that you made. Every American knows a union member. Every American does, and that's because they're cheering for him, in the stands, or they're watching them on TV, or because they're seeing them in the movie theater, or because they're listening to their music, or they have a family member who's a plumber or a carpenter or a teacher who's in a union. And I think it's very important to the union movement to have union members who are very, very public talk about unions, to be public about their support for unions, and to show that collective bargaining can produce what you produce for the minor leaguers, which is a better life for working people. So, Tony, you've been amazingly generous with your time. Very last question. You want to tell us who's going to win the World Series this year? Want to give us an insight? I'm ready. I won't tell anybody.
I will tell you, Seth, I can guarantee you the team that wins the World Series this year will be the team that has the most runs after winning the World Series. I guarantee that will be the case.
Well, not in that, certainly in that last game, that's going to be true, but not necessarily overall. If I understand, I'm not, me, I'm a basketball guy. I'm not as much of a baseball. You actually started as a basketball guy, but I'm not going to tell anybody that because it's, I don't want to undermine your credibility. Tony, Thank you so much for taking the time. Terrific conversation, as I knew it would be. Good luck moving forward. Keep this 1,000 batting average going.
No, we're going to keep the line moving, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on, Seth. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Hey, thanks for hanging around. Just a few more words after that terrific interview with Tony Clark. He's impressive, isn't he? I think he's just terrific. We want to make you aware of all the terrific content we have here on the Power at Work blog. So here's what I'd like you to do. Here's how you can make it up to us for this great interview that you just saw. First of all, go to the Power at Work blog. You're on the Power at Work blog, so just go to the subscribe button and subscribe. Give us your email address, and what we'll do in return is not just keep you up to date on the latest content on the blog, but every week we'll send you the weekly download. That's a compilation of about 24 articles, studies, podcasts, other things that we find on the internet that we think you'd like to see relating to worker power unions and workers. So if you subscribe, you'll get the weekly download in your inbox at the end of each week. We'd also love to have you follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You'll find us at Power at Work blog. That's at Power at Work blog on both Twitter and Instagram. Go follow us. That's another way we can keep you updated on the material that we're putting out. We've got a lot of terrific content coming up. This Friday, May 5th, we'll do our live Numbers Day, Workers by the Numbers blogcast with some top labor economists, and we'll be talking about the latest jobs, wages, and unemployment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Very important stuff. What does it mean for workers? What does it mean for worker power? So tune in. That's at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday, May 5th. But you would already know that, or you will find that out if you were following us on Twitter, following us on Instagram, and subscribing to the blog. So go do that right now. And in the meantime, really appreciate your coming. We'll see you on the blog real soon. Thanks.